Imagine a time when survival wasn't guaranteed, when every meal depended on what you could grow, gather, or preserve. Medieval peasants lived in a world without supermarkets, supplements, or takeout. Yet they endured harsh winters, deadly famines, and relentless toil, all thanks to a remarkable array of forgotten superfoods hiding in plain sight. Today, we're unlocking the secrets of their diet. From wild greens and humble grains to powerful fermented foods and nutrient-packed nuts, discover how simple, overlooked ingredients kept entire villages alive for centuries. Before we dive into this fascinating journey through history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more true stories of how people survived against the odds. And let us know in the comments, which of these medieval superfoods surprised you the most? Now get comfortable and let's begin. Morning broke softly across the medieval landscape. Thin tendrils of mist clung to the fields, and the air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth. Inside a modest wattle and daub cottage, a peasant family stirred. Before the sun fully rose, work had already begun. Every day was shaped by necessity, and nothing was more important than food. Survival depended on what the land could give, and what their hands could coax from it. Their first task, like every morning, was simple but essential. The mother ladled a thick, warm porridge from a blackened iron pot hanging over the fire. Barley, humble and unassuming, formed the base of this meal. Unlike delicate wheat, barley flourished in the harsh, cool climate. It didn't mind poor soils or biting winds. Though coarse and heavy, barley bread and porridge kept hunger at bay, filling stomachs with dependable, earthy energy. Alongside barley, rye played a quiet yet vital role. It wasn't a grain of luxury, but it was tough, thriving in places where wheat faltered. Its dark, dense loaves were a familiar sight on peasant tables, often sour and heavy, yet they stayed fresh longer than their lighter counterparts. In difficult times, rye bread became a trusted companion, a steady answer to gnawing hunger. Not far from the hearth, a child munched on leftover oatcakes. Oats were the unsung heroes of peasant life, grown for both people and their animals. Oatmeal was a staple, simple to prepare and filling. But oats were versatile. They could be baked, boiled, or even brewed into ale, a mild drink safer than often contaminated water. For the common folk, oats were more than food, they were sustenance in its purest form. Though grains formed the backbone of their meals, they were far from the only crop that kept peasants going. In the family's small garden plot, the low leafy heads of cabbages stood strong. These hardy vegetables were among the most reliable in the medieval world. Fresh in the summer and preserved through fermentation in the winter, cabbages offered vital nutrients when other vegetables were scarce. The sharp tang of sauerkraut often broke the monotony of winter meals, offering both flavor and essential vitamins. When the main meal came, often in the form of a bubbling pottage, another quiet hero joined the table. Legumes, beans, peas, and lentils simmered alongside cabbage leaves and herbs. These modest seeds provided something precious: protein. In a world where meat was rare and expensive, legumes filled the gap. Rich in fiber and deeply satisfying, they not only nourished the family but also nourished the land itself. Peasants understood that planting legumes restored the soil, keeping their small fields fertile year after year. Outside the cottage, the rooster crowed again. Another day of labor awaited, plowing, sowing, mending, and tending. Yet as the family stepped into the morning light, they carried with them the quiet strength drawn from their simple meal. What they ate wasn't luxurious or exotic, but it was powerful in its own right. It was food born from patience, resilience, and a deep knowledge of the land, the very essence of survival for medieval peasants. Beyond the tilled fields and fenced gardens lay a world untouched by the heavy hand of the plow, a realm of forests, meadows, and tangled hedgerows. To outsiders, these wild places may have seemed chaotic, even hostile. But for medieval peasants, they were a second home. Here, knowledge passed quietly from parent to child, revealed hidden treasures that could mean the difference between survival and starvation. As winter's grip loosened and early spring tiptoed in, familiar faces in the wild returned. The first to emerge were the nettles, their jagged leaves lined with fine hairs ready to sting the careless. But peasants were not careless. They knew that once boiled or steeped, nettles transformed. Rich in iron and vitamins, these greens were among the earliest fresh foods available after the long months of dried and salted fare. When cupboards were bare and hope wore thin, a steaming bowl of nettle soup revived bodies starved for nutrients. The world around them teemed with other overlooked gifts. In the meadows, dandelions pushed their golden heads through the grass. Today dismissed as weeds, then they were lifesavers. Peasants gathered the tender young leaves for salads and soups. Later, they harvested the roots, drying and grinding them as a humble substitute for rare and costly spices or even coffee-like drinks. When seasons were lean, every part of the dandelion became precious. Venturing into shaded glades and the cool hush beneath trees, foragers hunted for wild garlic. Its sharp, unmistakable scent guided them, a fragrant beacon in the quiet woods. These tender leaves not only added a much-needed kick to bland stews and pottages but also brought protection. Wild garlic, long respected for its medicinal properties, was believed to ward off illness and cleanse the blood, invaluable in times when disease lurked everywhere. Deeper still in the forest, where light barely kissed the forest floor, grew mushrooms. Peasants understood their dangers well. Knowledge of which were edible, and which deadly was passed down like a sacred trust. When safely gathered, mushrooms were a rare delicacy, lending earthy richness to otherwise modest meals. They were often dried on strings above the hearth, ensuring that their bounty would last through winter's dark days. The wild also offered sweetness, though fleeting and precious. As summer matured, the brambles thickened with berries, blackberries, elderberries, raspberries. Children scrambled through thickets, their fingers stained dark as they filled woven baskets. These berries were more than treats. They were vital sources of vitamins, and when preserved as jams or dried, they lit up cold winter days with memories of sunshine. By late autumn, even the hedgerows bowed under the weight of nature's generosity. Sloes, though sharp and bitter, were gathered to be steeped into warming drinks, while elderberries were brewed into cordials thought to fend off colds. For the medieval peasant, the wilderness was no empty expanse. It was alive with opportunity. To thrive, or simply to endure, one had to listen to the seasons, read the subtle language of leaves and berries, and gather wisely. While lords dined on venison and imported spices, peasants wove survival from what others might overlook. In doing so, they crafted a diet not just of necessity, but of quiet, hard-earned wisdom. By the time autumn whispered its arrival with falling leaves and cooler winds, medieval peasants knew the true test of survival was fast approaching. Winter was not a passing inconvenience. It was a season that could break the unprepared. Every scrap of food mattered, and so the gathering turned from the lush bounty of summer to the quiet resilience of seeds and nuts, nature's hidden reserve. As fields emptied and gardens grew bare, the woodlands became a sanctuary once more. Beneath mighty oaks and chestnuts, peasants stooped low to gather what others might ignore. Acorns, though bitter in their raw state, were carefully leached of tannins through soaking and boiling. Once safe to consume, they were ground into a coarse flour. Though not as satisfying as barley or rye, this acorn meal added valuable bulk and calories to bread during lean months. Nearby, hazel trees offered a more desirable gift. Hazelnuts, easy to gather and store, were rich in fats, a precious commodity in a diet otherwise light on oils and meat. Their versatility made them indispensable. Crushed and added to pottage, or simply eaten raw, hazelnuts delivered both nourishment and rare indulgence, providing long-lasting energy that peasants desperately needed for laborious winter tasks. Flax, too, held a subtle but vital place in the medieval diet. While its fibers clothed villagers in rough linen, the tiny seeds were collected and consumed as well. Flax seeds, when ground, produced oil or could be added to breads and gruels. Their omega-rich content offered more than sustenance. They gave strength to bodies wearied by toil and exposure to the elements. In small pockets of the countryside, peasants also knew to harvest hemp seeds. Though less celebrated today, in medieval times they were valued for much more than textile use. Pressed for oil or eaten whole, they provided critical fats and proteins that could help stretch meager meals. Their mild, nutty taste blended easily into dishes, offering both texture and sustenance. No less important was the mighty walnut. Larger and harder to come by, walnuts were often shared communally, cracked open during gatherings when harvests were safely stored. Their richness made them a delicacy among peasants, but also a source of essential fats during cold, lean winters. When meats were rare or absent, walnuts filled the void with their deeply satisfying and nourishing kernels. Even small seeds like poppy and mustard had their place in the peasant's kitchen. Though they offered little bulk, they brought flavor and diversity to repetitive dishes. Mustard seeds, crushed and mixed with vinegar or wine, transformed bland meals into something zestier. Poppy seeds, meanwhile, occasionally crowned breads and simple pastries, adding tiny bursts of taste and texture to everyday fare. As winter approached and daylight shortened, peasants relied increasingly on these hardy, storable foods. They lacked the luxury of fresh greens or sun-warmed berries, but seeds and nuts carried within them the silent promise of life. Carefully hoarded in sacks and jars, hidden away in cool, dark cellars or hung from rafters, these small but mighty superfoods offered not only calories but hope. In the stillness of frost-covered mornings, when breath hung visible in the air and the land lay silent, that hope sustained families until the world stirred to life once again. As winter deepened, the medieval landscape transformed into a realm of scarcity and silence. Fields that once bustled with the labor of sowing and harvesting now lay dormant beneath frost and snow. For peasants, these long, dark months tested every ounce of preparation and ingenuity they had stored during the abundant seasons. This was when preservation, more than mere abundance, became the key to survival. Inside cold cottages, food was carefully rationed. Every morsel consumed was a product of foresight. Among the most essential preserved foods was cabbage. Grown in abundance during the growing season, it was not merely eaten fresh but also transformed through fermentation. In earthen crocks, peasants layered shredded cabbage with salt and weighted it down, leaving nature to perform its quiet alchemy. Weeks later, sauerkraut emerged, tangy, packed with vitamin C, and resistant to spoilage. In the depth of winter, when scurvy and malnutrition loomed, sauerkraut was nothing short of life-saving. In a similar fashion, pulses and legumes continued to provide nourishment long after they had been harvested. Dried peas, beans, and lentils were easily stored and rehydrated when needed, simmered into hearty stews and pottages that warmed cold bones. Though modest in appearance, these simple dishes provided crucial protein when meat was out of reach for all but the wealthiest. Lentils, in particular, were favored for their ability to cook quickly and offer filling sustenance. Peasants also made clever use of dairy, though in limited quantities. Fresh milk soured quickly, so when cows and goats could be milked, preservation was essential. Butter and cheese were common solutions, and though only modest amounts were available to the poor, they were prized additions to their diet. Cheese, especially when aged, could endure for months and provided valuable fats and proteins during times when other sources of nourishment were scarce. Not all preservation relied on salt or drying. In the cool corners of cottages and cellars, root vegetables like turnips, parsnips, and carrots slumbered in barrels of sand or straw, safely shielded from frost. These earthy staples remained edible deep into the winter, offering variety to otherwise repetitive meals. Turnips, though sometimes maligned as peasant fare, were versatile and filling, boiled, mashed, or added to stews for substance. Another, often overlooked superfood came from the humble apple. During the harvest months, peasants worked quickly to gather as many as possible. Some apples were eaten fresh, while others were dried or pressed into cider, a vital drink that lasted through winter. Even the vinegar made from spoiled cider played a role, used both for seasoning and for preserving vegetables and meats, when possible. Yet, the most unassuming but essential superfood came from the humblebee. Honey, treasured for both its sweetness and preservative qualities, was a prized commodity. Peasants often kept hives if they could, or foraged wild honey from hollow trees. Beyond sweetening gruels and breads, honey was vital for making mead, a drink that not only lifted spirits but also kept them safe from often unsafe water sources. As snow piled against cottage walls and the land outside lay still, these preserved foods provided more than nutrition. They brought comfort, variety, and memory, flavors tied to warmer days and reassurance that, even in the harshest months, nature still offered its gifts. Through fermentation, drying, and careful storage, medieval peasants extended the bounty of summer and autumn deep into the heart of winter, sustaining themselves with wisdom honed by generations of survival. By the time winter began to loosen its icy grip, the medieval peasant had endured months of hardship. Yet they emerged from these dark months not broken, but quietly triumphant. Their survival had not depended on any single crop or harvest, but on the delicate balance of knowledge, resourcefulness, and reverence for nature. Every morsel consumed told the story of this harmony, a story largely forgotten in today's world of abundance. As spring sunlight slowly returned, melting the last traces of snow, the rhythms of life began to stir again. Seeds saved from the previous year were pressed into soil still cold from winter's touch. Grains like barley, oats, and rye would soon rise again, their golden heads promising months of sustenance ahead. These grains had carried them through hunger, not only as daily bread and porridge but also as the foundation for drinks like ale, which quenched thirst safely when clean water could not. From the same earth, peasants gathered greens as soon as they could. Nettles pushed through before many other plants dared, offering early, much-needed nutrients. Wild garlic returned, its sharp aroma filling kitchens again with life and flavor. For the peasant, these were not weeds or novelties. They were vital allies that revived the body after winter's long nutritional drought. Beyond the fields, forests and hedgerows awakened as well. Hazelnuts and walnuts, carefully rationed all winter, gave way to fresh blossoms that promised future harvests. Bees hummed to life, returning to their endless work of creating honey, nature's gift that preserved sweetness through dark seasons. Even humble dandelions reappeared, first as tender greens and soon as golden bursts that fed both peasants and pollinators alike. The cycle of life was more than observed, it was lived and depended upon. Everything had a role. Mushrooms, foraged carefully when they returned in the damp months, added depth to meals. Legumes, the unsung protein sources of peasants, were again planted, not only to feed families but to restore the soil's health. This relationship with the land was never exploitative. It was reciprocal, built on understanding that taking also meant giving back. Preservation methods, too, reflected this balance. Sauerkraut continued to ward off disease long before vitamins were understood. Dried beans and pulses guaranteed that even lean months could be faced without despair. Cider from stored apples quenched thirst as snow melt filled streams again. Each method was a quiet testament to generations of learning, proof that survival wasn't luck but accumulated wisdom. Yet what may be most surprising to modern eyes is the nutritional depth of this diet. Though shaped by necessity, it was not one of deprivation. Rather, it was rich in fiber, vitamins, plant proteins, and fermented foods that aided digestion and strengthened immune systems. Without knowing the science, peasants had built, through tradition, a diet that kept them alive and often remarkably resilient. By late spring, as fields turned green once again and markets slowly refilled, the hardest days slipped into memory. Peasants returned to planting, mending, and living. They did so with the quiet confidence of people who knew they could endure. Their forgotten superfoods, from the humble oat and resilient rye to wild nettles, nuts, fermented cabbage, and foraged mushrooms, had carried them through yet another winter. These foods were not exotic or luxurious. They were simple, honest, and quietly powerful. In them lay the secret of medieval survival, a deep, instinctive connection to the land and an unspoken agreement with nature that, if respected, it would always provide. Survival in medieval times was never easy, but through wisdom, tradition, and deep respect for nature, peasants created diets that quietly sustained them through even the harshest years. These forgotten superfoods weren't trends or luxuries. They were lifelines, woven into every meal with care and ingenuity. If you enjoyed this story and want to explore more about how people of the past overcame unimaginable challenges, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week, we reveal forgotten truths and powerful stories from history to help you learn, wonder, and reflect. Leave a comment sharing which medieval superfood you'd be brave enough to try today, and as always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.